couple of big news stories. One is we've sort of formed a government. Well, hey, we might do by after the weekend. The other big one is an announcement that there will be a 4-day ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. Now, this has been set back by, up to a day, but is likely to begin at 7 p.m. tonight, New Zealand time. Now, there is going to be an exchange of prisoners. There's going to be a ceasefire. Of course, there's going to be aid able to go into the Gaza region. But what will this mean, both initially and longer term, for Gaza and for the whole region? Professor of International Relations at the University of Otago, Professor Robert Patman, joins us now. Robert, kia ora. Thanks for your time today.
You're all right, Andrew. Oh, it's a pleasure.
This has been a long time coming and a difficult ceasefire to broker, and during this time thousands killed in Gaza, many of them children, many more wounded and injured. What is happening later today, New Zealand time? What is a ceasefire going to involve, apart from, of course, a cessation of the bombing?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, it's not what we would normally term a ceasefire. It's a humanitarian truce or a humanitarian pause. It will last for 4 days, and it will kick in 7 a.m. Friday local time in Gaza.
Yeah.
So probably in the evening our time, I think, or later on. But the crucial thing to note is this: it's taken a while to negotiate. Qatar from the Gulf states has played a key role in mediating. It was Qatar that made the announcement. The United States and Egypt have also played a key negotiating role in brokering this agreement between Hamas and Israel. And as you indicated in your introductory remarks, Andrew, it provides a welcome respite, 4 days. And I think there will be some parties involved in this negotiation who will try and prolong what started off as a 4-day humanitarian pause to something a little bit more longer and perhaps long-lasting. But Israel's defense minister has made it clear today, and Mr. Netanyahu has as well, the prime minister, that the Israelis see this as purely 4 days only, and they will be resuming their campaign against Hamas as soon as the 4 days are up.
We will look at what happens in those 4 days in just a moment, but I suppose one of the conditions and the reason that this ceasefire was able to be brokered, a ceasefire, a condition on beginning to release some hostages over stages, starting with small children and women, but just 50 of the hostages set to be released at this stage. Do we know more detail?
Yes, that's my understanding. There's 50 hostages that will be released by Hamas. That's the hostages that were taken during that horrendous terror attack on Israel on the 7th of October. Meanwhile, the Israelis will effectively release 3 Palestinians, and these are also women and children, which have been detained in Israeli prisons. They will also be released. So for every one of Hamas's hostages, 3 Palestinians will be released. So, but yet both sides are releasing largely women and children.
Yeah, and we're not talking combatants in this regard. It is women and children. It's teenagers being arrested for throwing rocks, that type of caliber.
Yeah. I mean, it's a welcome step forward, but it's a small. We've got to get this in proportion. We understand that Hamas took 240 hostages. So there's Hamas, from their point of view, are releasing 50 in a 4-day period. That still gives them quite a bit of bargaining power to either extend the pause or restart another pause at a later date.
There is, sorry to interrupt, there has been a suggestion that there's a possibility of the truce being extended for an extra day for an additional 10 hostages freed. Do you know any more about that, Robert?
No, only what you know, that there does seem to be an agreement that if Hamas release an extra 10, then the pause can be extended by a day for extra 10 release. So if they were to, or as we get to the last day of the 4-day pause, if they indicate the next day they release 10, then the pause goes on for another day. And then
Mhm.
if they indicate they release another 10, presumably they can extend the pause. So they've given Hamas, in theory, the ability to extend the pause for quite a long time.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what happens during this ceasefire? Lots of questions about that. There's comments that there's 200 trucks a day ready to roll across the border into Gaza from Egypt in terms of aid. Question marks about whether or not this will include fuel, but certainly food, water, medication. That's going to be what will be
It's
happening.
urgently required.
Yeah,
There's lots of people in Gaza who are literally starving.
yeah,
And, what many people don't realize is that on the 7th of October in the evening, water, fuel, and food was cut off.
yeah.
And so they normally, before, let's be quite clear, Gaza was the subject of an Israeli blockade from 2006 up till the 7th of October 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So the conditions in Gaza are already pretty dire.
Yeah.
We know that 80% of the population in Gaza already depends on food aid before this crisis began. So what we will be seeing is the resumption, and obviously humanitarian organizations are hoping to get much needed food and supplies into the Gaza Strip. There's talk about 200 trucks.
Yeah.
Before the war, before the onset of hostilities, something like 500 trucks a day were getting into Gaza via the Egyptian border.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's a lot of ground to be made up, but it is at least some improvement on what's been happening.
Yeah, anything is an improvement on of course, what we've seen in the last 7 weeks or so. I suppose another aspect of good news, and it's difficult to find it in this circumstance, but there seems to be, at least no significant international acceleration of hostilities. There was talk about perhaps the entire region that hostilities would kick off. That hasn't seemed to be the case, Robert?
No, there have been exchanges of artillery, though, between Israel and Hezbollah in northern Lebanon. But it seems that both sides, it was a managed exchange, so to speak. Both sides were eager not to let it get out of hand. But, of course, what we do know about conflict is that with the best of intentions, things can get out of hand.
Mm.
And the one thing that's predictable about war, that it's often unpredictable, and it is still a very dangerous situation. Hezbollah said they would respect the humanitarian truce, but this situation, we need to be very clear about this. This is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of human suffering that's gone on, and some big questions have to be asked about what is the next step. The Israeli government has said that they want to achieve all their objectives of destroying Hamas. The question is, they've been having a good go at this, an intensive bombardment in which according to the UN, more than 13,000 13,000 civilians have died altogether.
Yeah.
If you include the civilians killed by Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
On the 7th of October, that's a tremendous amount. 67% of those casualties are women and children.
Mm-hmm.
So that's horrendous, and it can't go on. The world can't stand by and watch the murder of people who are not connected to a terrorist attack. And big questions have to be asked about the UN Security Council and about the next step, because tit-for-tat violence is the big question, I suppose, is, and the Americans will probably be asking the Israelis this, well, you've had 7 weeks at this. Are you closer to being secure? And the answer is probably no.
Yeah.
And another 2 months, which is the time period that the defense minister is currently indicating of Israel to complete the job, as they call it. What is completing the job? Even if you exterminate Hamas, which is a difficult thing in itself, because their leaders are outside the Gaza Strip and they have links with many Arab countries. But even if that's achieved, what about the the civilians who've lost family members, they will presumably be quite embittered towards Israel.
Yeah.
So there has to be a political initiative here, is what I'm struggling to say. We can't just focus on the military. We have to say what comes next. How can we reconcile Israel's understandable desire for security with the Palestinians' understandable desire for political self-determination, having hit a roadblock in that area for more than 5 decades? So we've really got to get a political initiative underway. We can't have more of this continued violence indefinitely, not least for the question you've raised, because the potential for it spreading.
Yeah. Now, ceasefire is good news in itself, but by this time next week, it'll be all on again, potentially. And, I mean, as you say, at least another 2 months from an Israeli point of view. This is a good sign, though. Certainly not the end of hostilities, but could it be the beginning of the end?
It could be. It will give both Israeli decision makers and, more importantly, I think, the Biden administration some breathing space. It's Thanksgiving in the United States, time to reflect. And Mr. Biden is taking a lot of heat. At the beginning of this crisis, it looked like he'd taken a politically safe option, backing Israel with election year coming up against a Republican opposition, which is even more pro-Israel. But in fact, what we've seen is splits in the Democratic Party, public opinion basically turning against supporting the sort of massive bombardment that Israel has engaged in. America has provided lots of weapons. So in a sense, many Americans are saying, look, I didn't pay my tax dollars to murder children. And it's getting as blunt as that. And I think the Democrat Party, recent polls show that up to 80% of Democrats have questioned Biden's leadership during this period. So, there's a chance for America to reconsider. The interesting thing is that the American government have laid down some red lines. One red line is that Israel should not reoccupy Gaza, and that the Palestinians must not be displaced. And the third one is that the Palestinians won't be Hamas, but the Americans are very keen on the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank to extend their authority to Gaza. So there's some issues there that need some careful consideration. Yeah.
Well, hey, we certainly appreciate your wisdom and insight as always, Robert. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Andrew.